Welcome everybody. This session is titled Adapting Your Digital Media Strategy During Major Societal Shifts. Welcome, welcome. My name is Betty Simpson. I'm your CIS moderator and I'm glad to be here today. Just a few housekeeping things where we are recording. When we go out into breakout rooms later, we will not be recording those, but for the purpose of recording this as good learning content for the network, we are recording this. And a few other housekeeping items. Please mute your microphone unless you're asked to kind of participate and communicate and engage later on. Ensure that you're connected in audio in one way to avoid feedback. Pose your questions in the chat function. You can search for CIS moderator and we'll have a time of question and answer at the end. Also join us on social media appropriately so. Please use the hashtag #AllInForKids hashtag and share what you're learning. I'm really proud to be introducing my colleagues, Amy Elhove and Rashida McCoy today. Amy is the Director of Digital Strategy at the CIS National Office and has over 17 years of digital marketing and communications experience, specifically working for nonprofits in the DC metro area. Rashida is the Senior Digital Communications Manager at the National Office and has 7 years of digital marketing and communications experience, also within nonprofits in the DC metro area. And at CIS, Amy and Rashida are responsible for collaborating with the team to develop and execute the overall integrated digital media strategy to help deepen engagement with CIS stakeholders and attract new constituents through consistent execution of digital experiences. So I'm really happy that they are leading the session today. And the purpose of this session is just to recognize that over the past year, especially with the pandemic, racial reckoning, political and economic environments, they've not only shifted the way that we think about and use digital media, but have also changed the way that we communicate with one another. One benefit is that it has allowed more space for different styles of audience and stakeholder engagement online. So during the session, we'll discuss how you can pivot and adjust your digital media strategy to adapt to uncertain times. A few learning objectives as participants. You will learn effective strategies on how to pivot and adjust brand and campaign messaging. You'll examine ways to leverage various digital media tools to advance and streamline your work. And you will explore different storytelling techniques to help reach your target audiences. And from here, I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks for the introduction, Betty. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Let's dive in. With the pandemic, racial reckoning, and shifting political environment, culture changed in important ways in 2020. We realized the importance of speaking up for a world that includes everyone. We opened our eyes to different ways of learning, and we spent more time online than ever before. And this all shifted the way that we think about and use digital media, and it changed the way we communicate with each other. Out of necessity, we became more comfortable connecting with each other online, and concerns about screen time and time well spent went out the window. Did you know there was a 215% increase in time spent on mobile? I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that Zoom was one of the fastest growing apps of the pandemic. Americans spent an average of 82 minutes per day on social in 2020. And the pandemic accelerated an already ravenous appetite for video content. It's estimated that by next year, a staggering 82% of all created content will be video. Next slide, please. That brings us to our poll. We're interested in knowing which digital media tools are you now using more than ever? Please take a moment to select one or more tools.
And I think most people have responded, so we'll go ahead and share the results.
By far, Zoom and social media seem to be the tools that we're using now more than ever, which is no big surprise. Next slide, please. With more time than ever spent online, we want to be more efficient, but instead we're pulled in many different directions. The question is, how do we streamline when we're on so many platforms and using so many different tools? That's something that we are still trying to figure out. So together, we can figure out how to become more efficient. And because it helps to share our learnings, we welcome your suggestions for tools that you find valuable in the chat, as I walk you through a couple of tools that have helped us become more efficient in our everyday work. Sprout Social is one of our favorites that we use on a daily basis. Not only does it help us streamline our social media approval and publishing process, but it helps us with our overall goals and strategy to increase followers and engagement. For example, we're able to see at a glance how all 4 of our platforms are performing and which posts have the most engagement. This has been valuable for us to be able to determine what type of content appeals to our audience on each platform. That way, we're not duplicating content 4 times and blasting out the same content. We're being intentional about what we say and who we say it to. This strategy is resulting in increased engagement and increased followers. Social Press Kit helps us easily package and share on-brand content more broadly. It helps us streamline our work, and with one click, our affiliates, advocates, supporters, and influencers can distribute our approved content to their personal networks to grow our reach. Monday is a project management tool that we cannot live without. For example, we're using a Monday board to organize our email calendar and help us with our audience targeting and segmentation strategy. In the past, we've been siloed and separate requests would come to Marcom from different departments without anyone knowing the big picture of who we were emailing and when. Now we have it centralized and organized so that at a glance, we can see all the organizational emails going out, and we're not overwhelming any of our audiences with too many competing messages and calls to action. Rev is a handy tool that automatically converts speech to text. So instead of transcribing audio from video ourselves, you can use this tool to do it for you. And lastly, Restream is a new tool that we're using this year. It's a powerful live streaming service that allows us to broadcast live content to more than 30 streaming channels simultaneously. With all the virtual events that we've been doing this past year, such as community chats and Milliken dialogues, we found this tool super useful. Next slide, please. So recent societal shifts have not only impacted our use of digital media tools, but they've also impacted our creative and messaging in major ways. Facebook recently released a report called the 2021 Creative Forecast, 5 creative behaviors for the future shaped by cultural shifts over the last year. It's included in our handouts if you'd like to take a closer look. They point out that in 2020, culture changed and that changed creativity. People push brands to become more culturally aware, more personal, and more participatory. And people gravitated to brands that reflected and captivated them and showed them that they're more than willing to spend time with the ones that delivered. Next slide, please. Facebook analyzed over 100 Facebook ad campaigns that saw above average performance in 2020. They then looked at the key aspects that drove improved ad response and identified 5 key behaviors in successful messaging and creative approaches. The first behavior that drove improved ad response was building more inclusive creative. Brands seeing stronger performance focused on more inclusive creative, depicting their audiences in representative and insightful ways. The next key behavior that drove improved ad response was creating edutainment experiences. Brands that reimagined learning and sought to provide education in creative ways generated more positive responses than brands that lectured their audience about their brand stories. The third behavior that they found to be successful was communicating ideas in new ways. With in-person social interactions limited, brands that were able to communicate ideas aligned with the desire to find information did very well. The key was to hone in on a differentiating concept to not only drive interest, but to motivate the audience to take action. The fourth behavior that drove improved ad response was leveraging user-generated content and speaking that particular platform's language. In other words, brands that were successful created content more aligned with user-generated posts and updates. So ads that looked less like ads and ads that incorporated users' content. And finally, the last behavior that drove improved ad response was rewarding self-discovery. Creative that connected with people's desire for personalized, guided information saw improved response. So personalized content and experiences are key here. Next slide, please. So Facebook showed us how major societal shifts impacted ad creative. So now I'm going to turn to how these shifts affected CIS and made it critical for us to evolve our messaging to be more relevant to the times. So prior to 2020, CIS sponsored a successful brand awareness campaign that targeted an informed and inclined to care audience. As you can see with the ad on the left, the campaign was focused on conveying the "in schools to help kids stay in school" message, with visuals and copy that spoke to building caring relationships with students inside schools. We used messaging such as, "We partner with teachers so what happens outside the classroom doesn't impact students learning inside the classroom." But CIS had to adapt to the times. Major societal shifts due to the pandemic and racial reckoning resulted in a brand language refresh in 2020, where we shifted to saying not just "in schools," but "in schools and beyond." As you can see in the middle ad, we talked about how this year there are more students who need extra support, whether they're learning in school or at home, and about how we go wherever we're needed. Overall, messaging themes shifted to talking more about how we unlock potential, build relationships, and break down barriers. CIS also became more intentional about talking about who we are, what we believe, and what we emphasize in our messaging when we talk about our work. In particular, the way we talk about equitable education, breaking down barriers, and empowering students to stand up against barriers such as racism, discrimination, and exclusion all became more of a focus in our messaging. Now, if you look at the ad image on the right, you can see a preview of where we're headed in the next iteration of our messaging. The focus is shifting again, this time to re-engagement. We're shifting the messaging to say, CIS is bringing communities of support to students. And we're saying, at communities and schools, we're working to ensure students have everything they need to re-engage in learning, whether they are staying at home or returning to the classroom. As you can see, the creative is also shifting to focus more on communities of support. Next slide, please. Research and focus groups conducted in fall 2020 suggested that there might be an opportunity for CIS to tap additional audiences for support, particularly around our mission to create an equitable learning environment and connecting students with critical resources. With this goal in mind, CIS looked at a broader population of US donors to understand if there are different personas we can motivate to support our mission. The audience personas research uncovered 3 distinct donor segments that went beyond the existing informed and inclined to care audience. Those 3 groups were the change-ready champions, the justice seekers, and the independence nurturers. Focus groups gave us an opportunity to test which ideas in our messaging resonated most with these specific segments to get a better sense of how to connect with them individually and collectively. By understanding our different donor personas, we can learn how to attract and motivate new donors to support our mission. In particular, we've decided to focus on the change-ready champions, who I'll talk about now, and the justice seekers, who Rashida will talk about a little later. Just a note that we're not focusing on the 3rd group, the independence nurturers, at this time. But if you'd like to learn more about them, you can refer to our handouts to find more information about all the personas. Next slide, please. The Change Ready champions are our core supporters who already know and support CIS. They're moved by collective action, they're community oriented, and they're focused on local impact. We should message them about our commitment to creating collective change, the ways CIS helps create access to critical resources, and how we build lasting relationships that change students' lives and help them see themselves differently. And we can connect with them through digital channels such as the website, email, and Facebook, event-based and retail giving opportunities, and partnerships with schools and youth development organizations. Next slide, please. And this audience can be motivated by highlighting the ways today's impact drives lasting and generational change. We can do this by being vocal about social responsibility. For example, during Spirit Week, we hosted a Facebook Live to talk about equitable education. We can also use calls to action to make it clear we need them to join our movement. So for example, we now have a back to school pledge on our website where we're asking people to kind of join the movement by signing the pledge to be all in for kids this back to school season. We can also invite them to get involved with local affiliates, and we can spotlight student stories that draw a clear line to how CIS helped. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rashida to talk about the justice seekers.
Thanks, Amy. As Amy said, we have 3 target audiences. Next up are the justice seekers. Now, these individuals are actually like our main individuals that we want to target and try to reach on a regular basis. So they want to feel a personal touch and a connection to the work that we do. Not only do they want you to be attentive to the basic needs, but they want to know how we provide them, food, housing, healthcare. They also want to believe that everyone should have access to aid. Those are some key things that they want to hear about on the regular. Also, they enjoy learning about how we're building an equitable path to education. And also in the sense of that, how we're helping students to overcome barriers, regardless of their race, zip code, or class. And when connecting with these individuals, we want to think about it through a digital front. They love to be on social media. They love to get an email and also snail mail too. And nothing wrong with direct mail. Next slide, please. These individuals are motivated by learning and seeing exactly what we're doing, as mentioned, those basic needs. So give them some examples, reach out to them, share your different types of examples that you're doing through newsletters. And in those newsletters, feel free to talk about what site coordinators are doing, those amazing porch visits, the re-engagement coordinators, the work that's being done, cultivate them, engage them on the regular basis. And through that work, make sure you're sharing the successes. They love to hear about the successes and how we're moving forward through these different types of tactics, and also utilizing the numbers and statistics that we pull from these successes. Next slide, please. Next up, Amy and I are going to chat a little about some of the difficulties and what works and what doesn't work when it comes to messaging and creatives for these individuals. So something that always works is imagery. We love to see it. So one thing that works, as you all know, is the old saying, it takes a village. We want to see what the village is doing. As mentioned before, share what you're doing. Talk about what your students are doing and how they're improving in the classroom, how you're making them feel more comfortable and connecting to their emotions and their graduation rate, and even what they're doing after graduation. They want to hear about it. They also want you to be able to talk about those individuals and their stories, the student stories specifically. Maybe there's a student story who's honing in right now about the difficulty that they're having in school. Allow them to share their story on relevant topics that may connect them to other students and push them along. Next slide, please.
Hold on one second. In terms of what doesn't work, there are certain things that don't work as well with our potential donors. And so some of those things are imagery or language that showcase certain groups of students but exclude others. Another thing that doesn't seem to work is language that's too broad. So for example, saying something like, whatever they need sounds disingenuous. Donors need more details on the how. Also, statistics that are too vague and don't make a clear point don't seem to work well with donors. And also the lack of clarity on the role of CIS trained professionals is confusing to a lot of people. So be more specific about school coordinators and the work that they do. Next slide, please. So how do we translate this new targeting and messaging in terms of practical application to our digital work? We use the personas and new messaging strategy to inform our work across our digital channels. As an example, when thinking about the design and messaging on the new DEI webpage, we took the two personas into consideration. To appeal to the change-ready champions, we talked about collective change and shared stories that exhibit how we are working to create equitable learning conditions for all students. To appeal to the justice seekers, we focused on social justice and breaking down barriers in the imagery and language, and offered CTAs that focused on social justice and 3 ways to make an impact. In another example, we used the personas and new messaging strategy to inform our work in our Facebook ads. When thinking about the messaging in the ads, we not only took the two personas into consideration, but we also targeted each audience based on the attributes and demographics defined by the personas. So to appeal to the change-ready champions, we stress social responsibility and encourage them to join the movement, to be all in for kids in the ad copy. And to appeal to the justice seekers, we focused on their interest in personal connections by being specific about how CIS helps in the ad copy. When we A/B tested this against language that was more general, the ad with the more specific examples did much better. So this brings us to our breakout session, where we'd like to hear more about what you all are doing.
All righty, so as Amy mentioned, next slide, please, Betty. If you look on the next slide here, we're going to take a moment and break you out into some groups for about 10 minutes to discuss one of the two prompts here. The first one, how have you adapted your messaging and creative strategy over the past 2 years? Or how has your use of digital tools and strategies evolved and made your work more effective? So thank you, Betty, for dropping those prompts in the chat. So before Betty drops you into your breakout groups, please grab those prompts and choose one in your group. Also select one person to be your note taker, another person to be your reporter. So in your breakout groups, you'll have 10 minutes to talk amongst each other about your prompt and decide on which one you want to share out, whether it's a top interesting piece or outcome, something informative, details, strategies, whatever comes to mind in reference to the prompt that you select. When you return back after the 10 minutes, you'll have about 2 to 3 minutes to report out, and we'll go from there and share our details. Any questions? All right, we'll see you back here in 10. Welcome back, everyone. Does everyone have their reporter ready to broadcast out to the group? All right, who would like to go first? Feel free to raise your hand and Betty will. Oh, hi, Kristen, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I can share out to everyone what you and your group talked about, what your prompt was.
Absolutely. So we went with this first one, how have we adapted? And it was a very similar, I think, in line with a lot of the things you all have already shared in thinking through who our target audiences are, but a lot of exciting conversation around highlighting the adaptability of our program and our site coordinators to meet the moment that is COVID-19 and adapt to a variety of different needs that our students are having. So focusing on the students, what they're experiencing and feeling, but then like you all said, like talking about how we're addressing those issues from our program perspective so that people can see the relevance and the value in our work during these moments. Another element that we talked about was the utilization of alumni success stories. Where are they now, if you will? And we've just started this out of the South Carolina market. And I was sharing that we have about 6,000 followers on our Facebook site. And our alumni posts have been, their impressions or their engagements have been ranging in the 3,000 and up mark, and they're far exceeding our other social media posts currently. Our corporate spotlights are also doing really well, but it's from a programmatic perspective. It's the alumni posts that are really garnering a lot of attention. So we talked about kind of like highlighting what's happening in the moment with the COVID stories and the student stories and the site coordinator impact, and then utilizing alumni to keep people kind of hopeful and reminder that the program can yield really amazing results and impact the future of a student's life. So that's what we talked about.
Oh, thank you, Kristen. That was great. I love the array from, ranging from corporate spotlights to alumni to student stories and different ways that you're keeping them engaged and keeping it new, of course, as well, like you said, what's going on in the media and happening around us. So thank you. Who would like to go next? Feel free to come off mute or raise your hand.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi. This is Kristen Eves from CIS Los Angeles.
Hi, Kristen.
Yeah, so my group, we spoke about prompt 1 as well. And what we were saying was our strategy definitely shifted, or we talked about strategy shifting during the pandemic. I was lucky enough to have somebody who's been with CISLA for some time and saw how our social media presence shifted during the pandemic and how it became a lot more interactive. And she even gave a great success story about how she had lost contact with one of her students and remembered that she had told them about our social media page, and the family was able to contact her through social media in our page. And from there, she was able to connect them to certain resources, especially, and this is during the pandemic. And so I think that's a powerful example of how like our messaging, which we're trying to make more around like being all in for kids and really showcasing the work we do, so that it's clear for our potential donors and clear to people we already work with, giving them that comfortability to even reach out to us, right? If we had just, pictures of posters and events that we're attending, then we wouldn't be able to emotionally pull these folks. And so shifting to that more all in for kids and showcasing it has been a success marker for us.
Thank you for that, Kristen. These Kristens are killing it today. Thank you, Kristens. No, that was very interesting. That's something that we actually did as well, Amy. When Amy first started, she did a whole social media evaluation and was like, we need some more student stories. We need to allow them to tell their own story. And like you said, showcase the work and the students and allow for that connectivity and that messaging to be there and come through in different forms and fashions. And for that student to find a place and a home from the resources that you're all having on social media and connect with you through that, that's powerful. That is very powerful. Thank you all for that. Next group. Who's our next reporter? Betty, there were 3 groups, correct? Oh, okay.
I was in group 3.
All right.
My name is Gabriela Benzo. I work with the CS of Virginia office. And we actually had an interesting amount of members in our group. Some of them have not been working for CIS for very long, but we actually kind of tackled this differently. We talked about prompt 1, and that's where we started, but then we kind of did touch a little bit on prompt 2. One of the things that we talked about is, the flexibility that we had to show during this time to meet families and children and where they are, in the way that works best for them. One of the things that we learned this year is that, a lot of people you could reach through social media. Then there were other people, like, let's say, for example, I work in an area where there is a lot of Hispanic families that use an app called WhatsApp. So a lot of groups and support groups were created through that app and through Facebook in order to help families connect with each other, for us to share resources with them, and for families even to share resources with each other and do some peer-on-peer interaction to help each other out. Also, we talked about the different tools and programs that are currently available to make things more successful, to be able to find out how well you're doing in different areas of outreach for engagement. And then finally, one of the things that I mentioned is that when you show some flexibility, and this is just from my personal experience this year, when you show some flexibility to really meet the needs of who you serve, you will find an increased level of engagement. And one of the things that I mentioned is that, the national average for engagement, what is considered, and I don't mean a CIS standard, but a national average standard for, tier 1 engagement would be 25% of your school. When we were flexible enough to try to meet the needs of families or students in a way that was most comfortable to them, we realized that the level of engagement increased to around 50% per school. So it really, this year has started to be nothing but flexible, I guess.
Love that. The pivot is real. That has been the word, the pivot. Loving how you are coming together in your groups to share resources. WhatsApp is also a key thing. We didn't put that one on one of our resources or platforms earlier that Amy mentioned, but WhatsApp is a great way to share content as well. So thank you so much for sharing out. Thank you everyone for sharing out and taking the time to chat amongst each other and share and brainstorm amongst each other. That was great. Next, we're going to mix it all together. Thank you, Betty. So today we talked a lot about several key components to digital strategy and storytelling and how now we can put it all together. So we started off by talking about how to develop an understanding of exactly who your target audience is and how to reach them and that messaging that you should share with them and for them particularly. You have to message them to see exactly what they want to hear and what they want to see. It's about them, of course. So the understanding comes from conducting surveys and resource focus groups and research groups and evaluations and utilizing your data. And then it also comes down to utilizing a social media strategy. Creating a social media strategy, of course, is a plan that you hope to achieve on social. Sometimes it doesn't go that way, but you pivot properly accordingly as you need to do. But that will guide your actions and let you know whether you're doing the best or if there's some room for improvement. Nothing wrong with that. Also, we talked about some key tools. Again, WhatsApp, hey, don't forget about that one. And Amy mentioned a plethora of them earlier, ranging from Spout Social to Social Press Kit and Monday. Utilize those tools to help leverage your plan and also engage with your audiences. Another piece was, as you all just did, network, and ask questions. Don't be afraid to talk amongst your peers. Everyone here today is officially a part of your network. Yay! Spread the word, talk to each other, exchange phone numbers, exchange emails, and do what you did today. Exchange ideas and support one another. In the end, we all have the same goal, and that is to be all in for kids to help our students have a brighter future. Next slide, please. All right, now there is an art to this storytelling thing that we've talked about today. And it's not enough to simply just speak on it and hire individuals of diverse backgrounds, but you want to be able to pull all that together. That messaging is key. So the way that everyone has conducted their own outsource of storytelling, whether it was through a specific platform or to a specific audience, that's the key. And the overall goal is to create value for diverse communities, as well as the universal stories. Don't be afraid to be a voice for the voiceless. They need to hear you. They need you to be their voice. And in the end, don't be afraid to focus on sharing DEI and incorporating it into everything you do. Putting forth that DEI lens is key. I'll give you a couple tips and tricks next. Next slide, please. So here are a couple tips and tricks to storytelling. Utilizing those donor personas, utilizing your research, and all those different things that you put together and we've talked about. So always want to be proactive and not reactive. We can't respond to everything and every issue in the news. I know we'd love to, but we can't. So if you can in advance, develop strategies, if possible, to incorporate in what we have in our national office. We do a monthly, not only DEI strategy calendar, but a monthly calendar looking at the federal holidays, the monthly holidays, and how we can incorporate that into the work we do and the students that we serve. So you see here an example at the bottom there is we had a great, beautiful social media graphic, thanks to Rena Stoppa, for Pride Month. So we took a time to think about, we were selective about what we're choosing, why we're choosing it, the copy, and also the imagery. Another piece was we also chose this year to share a social media graphic about the never say this word, y'all. I'm so sorry. I always mess this up. But the reflection of George Floyd. We took the time to reflect, on his passing and what that meant to us and the students in our network and the people in the communities that we serve. You see, we did not choose any imagery. We chose some very specific content and copy that mentioned his passing and particularly how it related to our students. So taking that time to review and prepare not only your calendar, but a DEI calendar is very helpful. And also, as mentioned, selecting those key graphics and your articles and your copy, be very particular and specific about that. Another piece we had which was a really fun campaign, was if you see up top is Johanna. So everyone meet Johanna. Johanna was great. She was a part of our CIS Goes Beyond campaign, where we share the aspirations that students have in life. And Johanna's aspiration was to be a musician. So we took the time, and she shared this story with us through her site coordinator and through her affiliate. So thank you to them and to her. We shared her story, how she wanted it to be shared. But once we got that story together from her, we crafted a social media post. But none of this content went out without her or her site coordinator's approval. Not only did they review the graphic, but they reviewed the social media copy and assured that also we used the correct pronouns for her. That was very important to us and to her as well. So also in the midst of that, we made sure that our content is not only accessible for those individuals who may be visually impaired, but also those who are hard of hearing. But in the end, you also want, as always, make sure that you're being compassionate and empathetic. Next slide, please. Here on this slide, we're just showing a couple more different techniques and how you can reach your audiences in different ways through storytelling. So a lot of you here have tuned into our community chat, so thank you, which Ray Saldana, our CEO and president, usually hosts, but also we've had some guest hosts too. We also have our podcast that we partner with CAS of Mid-Atlanta with. Thank you, shout out to them, which is a really great way where we have different topics and chats about whether it's in the media or something that's hot topic for CIS at the moment. And the most recent one we had was with Donna Dennis from CIS of Texas. She is a re-engagement coordinator. That's a key thing that we're speaking about throughout the network right now. Also, Amy does an awesome job managing our website. So if you see right next to it, the Setting Students Up for Success, we share student stories and articles there as well. And down bottom, you see Ray's Ray of Hope, which he likes to do himself and oftentimes get live and go live on Instagram and talk about different topics like back to school, what it means for re-engagement, or where we're at right now addressing our network. And of course, kind of some of the pieces that I shared with you all about social media, and we made it clear. The Christians have said today that they've made it a big piece of the work that they do to not only share, we're donating or here's how you can get involved, but also share those student stories. Share some pieces about how they can get involved through volunteering or through Spirit Week. So one more piece, we also like to share content about articles. We have the opportunity to partner with artist Stevens over at the Boys and Girls Club. Shout out to them and their appreciation for them partnering with us on an article that was shared and also still engaged with. Next slide, please. Kicking it back to Amy for a quick wrap up.
Thanks, Rashida. So to sum up, we recommend that you adapt your digital media strategy during uncertain times by doing the following. Learn who your target audiences are and how they want to be engaged. Shift your messaging to keep up with the times. Use digital media tools to be more efficient and effective in your work. There's a true art to digital storytelling, so remember to incorporate DEI. And of course, last but not least, network and ask lots of questions. Next slide, please. So as we move into the Q&A portion, we'd like to hear your questions, but we'd also like to know if there's anything related to messaging, digital tools, storytelling, or other things like branding or campaigns that you'd like to hear more about from the national office. So please drop in any thoughts into the chat and we'll address them after any questions.
So Amy and Rashida, I just had a question earlier when you were mentioning how you identified those 3 target audiences. And you mentioned that you conducted some market research and some focus groups on that. What recommendations would you have for identifying a target audience if there's an affiliate or a director of marketing out there who's like, I'm just not able to conduct that research for our own affiliate? What would you recommend?
Thank you for that question, Betty. When it comes to conducting research or pulling your metrics, social media has some great insights, as it's called on Facebook, insights, and some great metrics that they're there to tell you who your demographics are, your age range, where they're located. Those are some key areas that you can actually pull some content from and see exactly who your audience is and maybe hone in on them and also develop some target ads or some target posts there. Amy?
Sure. In addition, I'd recommend possibly surveying your current donors and or supporters via email. And you can also take a look at Google Analytics to see what the demographics of the audience looks like who are visiting your website. And, you know, definitely there are some other ways that you can find out more about your audience without having to go through focus groups and the larger type of surveys.
And then just to follow up to that, Amy and Rashida, you mentioned that that the national office can share some of the results of that donor research. Where would they go to find that information?
We actually shared the results of the donor personas research in our handouts. So you can find them there. And if you can't find them there, you can share your email address with any one of us in the chat, and we will just send it to you directly. And just kind of resurfacing the question, because we want to make sure that we're providing you all with, you know, information that is most useful to you. And so if there is anything that you would like to hear more about, feel free to reach out and email us if you don't want to put it into the chat right now. But we welcome your feedback and just any suggestions as to, you know, what would be helpful for you all.